All three of the films starring Thor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe are very different from one another. Unlike the Ant-Man films, the Iron Man films, Guardians of the Galaxy, or Spider-Man, Marvel hired a new director for every single film in the series. While this resulted in some wonky storytelling overall, the Thor trilogy when taken together does clearly fit, but in a way that doesn't work with Avengers Endgame. The original 2011 Thor film was directed by Kenneth Branagh, a director who clearly has a deep love for Shakespeare, having directed and simultaneously starred in multiple adaptations of Bill's work for the big screen. Kenneth Branagh's style of adapting classical fiction seems pretty evident in watching the original Thor, a film which takes many of the classical Thor elements very seriously, while at the same time making light of how goofy the aesthetics and dialogue of a Thor universe would seem in a modern setting. For the 2013 sequel, Thor: The Dark World, Kenneth Branagh declined to return due to scheduling reasons, and the successive director Patty Jenkins left the project because of creative differences over the story, seemingly much like the departure of Edgar Wright from the Ant-Man films. Thus, the film would eventually be helmed by Alan Taylor, a director with several television credits including Deadwood, Lost, and several episodes of Game of Thrones. Under Alan's direction, the second Thor film brought a much more somber take to Thor, leaning more into the drama of the two brothers and emphasizing the conflict between Thor and his father. After audiences reacted with annoyance or even boredom to Thor: The Dark World, it was hardly surprising that Marvel decided to let Taika Waititi do a near complete 180 on the Thor franchise for 2017's Thor Ragnarok. Reinventing the Thor franchise as a comedy, Taika adopted his irreverent deconstructive humor from previous cult classics like Flight of the Conchords and What We Do in the Shadows. Although Thor Ragnarok tended towards humor more so than any Marvel film to date, the film still featured a few sincere moments of strong character interaction like Loki and Thor's final conversation with their father and the elevator scene later in the film. Given the turbulent history of the Thor franchise, it should hardly be necessary to point out that three different directors with three different creative visions haven't always resulted in the most consistent characterization for the God of Thunder. Each film wanted to do something different with Thor and was very interested in being its own thing. However, the one thing I really appreciate about the Thor trilogy was that it was able to maintain and develop the central conflict of Thor's life, his acceptance of his role as King of Asgard. In the first Thor film, Thor is brash and unworthy to accept the role of king. In the second film, Thor is worthy enough to accept the role of king but rejects it because of an overdeveloped sense of humility, as an overcorrection for the lessons he learned in the first film. In the third Thor outing, Thor is finally able to accept the mantle of king and fully accept his responsibilities as a ruler. When comparing all three Thor films to one another, despite the shortcomings of the second film, to some extent they do eventually complement one another and develop this central conflict in Thor's life. But then came Avengers Endgame. While in many ways a really strong conclusion to the Infinity Saga, Avengers Endgame aggressively and frustratingly quashed the entire point of the Thor franchise. Seemingly for no other reason than that a fourth Thor film sounded like it would be fun, Thor decided to once again shirk his responsibility as king and summarily anoint one of his friends to rule instead. This is a terrible way to conclude Thor's conflict in Endgame, and definitely a terrible way to cap off the three Thor films so far. To give this moment more legitimacy, Endgame has a scene of Thor's mom telling him it's fine if he wants to go off adventuring instead of ruling his people. I couldn't believe this when I saw it in theaters. All due respect to the late Frigga, but Thor's mom really needed to watch her son's first movie, because she clearly missed the point of it. By telling Thor it's just fine and dandy to go adventuring and throw off the mantle of king, you essentially reset the character of Thor to be the same partying Asgardian he was before the start of the first movie. You undo his character development and absolve him of taking responsibility for his failures in leadership during the 5-year blip. And it's not like Thor 4 would have been impossible if you had let Thor remain king in New Asgard. He could still have left Earth to go on some really pressing missions and left Valkyrie in charge at the outset of Thor 4. But by framing this as a permanent transfer of power, Avengers Endgame actively undermines great scenes like this or this and dismisses the Thor films, forcing them to be random episodic adventures that leave no lasting impact on Thor as a person. I really hope that Thor 4 ends with Thor taking back the mantle of king, but if it doesn't, I feel like Endgame has permanently diminished the value of Thor as a character. Also, Steve should have died instead of Tony in Endgame. I will not be taking questions at this time.